People often believe that respect is something you earn from other people. They think if they're kind enough, helpful enough, patient enough, or successful enough, eventually everyone will treat them with dignity. But human psychology doesn't work that way. Before anyone decides how to treat you, they unconsciously ask one question. Asterisk, how does this person treat themselves? That question is answered long before you ever speak about your standards. It's answered in the way you carry yourself, the way you respond to pressure, the way you value your own time, and the behavior you're willing to tolerate. Human beings are experts at reading invisible signals. We constantly observe one another for clues about status, confidence, and boundaries. Most of this happens beneath conscious awareness. People don't need you to announce your value. They watch your actions and come to their own conclusions. This is why self-respect is not simply a personal virtue. It is a form of communication. Think about it carefully. If someone constantly apologizes for things that aren't their fault, always changes their opinions to please everyone else, accepts rude treatment without objection, and repeatedly sacrifices their own needs just to avoid conflict, what message are they sending? They may believe they are being generous or humble, but psychologically they are teaching others that their boundaries are flexible and that their dignity can be negotiated. People rarely respect standards that you refuse to enforce. This may sound uncomfortable because many of us were taught that being agreeable is the safest path. We were rewarded for being easy to manage, for saying yes, for avoiding disagreement. While kindness is an admirable quality, the kindness without self-respect slowly transforms into permission. The moment people realize there are no consequences for crossing your boundaries, some will continue crossing them, not necessarily because they are cruel, but because human nature constantly tests limits. This is one of the oldest patterns in social psychology. Every relationship, whether personal or professional, becomes a silent negotiation of expectations. People explore where the line is. They observe what you will accept and what you won't. If the line keeps moving backward, they learn that pushing you carries no cost. Your standards become invisible because you never defend them. This doesn't mean becoming aggressive or confrontational. In fact, genuine self-respect often looks remarkably calm. The strongest people don't constantly remind others to respect them. They simply refuse to participate in situations that violate their principles. They don't chase validation because their identity isn't built on someone else's approval. There is a quiet confidence that cannot be imitated. Notice the individuals who naturally command respect when they enter a room. They are not always the loudest. They are rarely the most dramatic. Often, they speak less than everyone else. Yet people pay attention. Why? Because every action communicates consistency. Their words match their behavior. Their decisions reflect clear values. They don't desperately seek acceptance because they already possess something far more powerful, self-acceptance. Psychologically, this creates certainty. And certainty is attractive because it signals emotional stability. People trust those who appear grounded in their own identity. They instinctively hesitate before disrespecting someone who clearly knows what they stand for. Now consider the opposite. Imagine someone who changes personalities depending on the people around them. One day they tolerate insults. The next day they complain about being disrespected. They promise consequences but never follow through. Their standards change with every situation. This inconsistency invites challenges. People are naturally drawn to predictable patterns. If your boundaries are unpredictable or non-existent, others begin testing them simply to discover where they actually exist. The reality is that every compromise you make with your own values teaches your mind something. Each time you remain silent when you know you should speak, each time you accept treatment that violates your dignity, each time you betray your own principles for temporary approval, your subconscious records it. Confidence doesn't disappear overnight. It erodes through repeated acts of self-abandonment. Eventually, the greatest loss isn't that others disrespect you, that you begin to question your own worth. And once that happens, people often sense it before you even realize it yourself. This is why genuine confidence cannot be faked through posture alone or rehearsed phrases. It grows from keeping promises to yourself. It grows from honoring your values when doing so is inconvenient. Every small act of integrity strengthens your identity. Every time you choose your principles over approval, you send two messages simultaneously. One message goes to the world. This is how I expect to be treated. The other goes to your own mind. I am someone worth protecting. Over time, those messages reinforce each other. Ironically, people who respect themselves deeply rarely spend their lives demanding respect. They don't need to. Their consistency creates an invisible boundary that others instinctively recognize. Some people will still choose disrespect. That is part of life, but they quickly discover that access to you is not guaranteed. They lose your attention, your trust, or your presence. That consequence alone is often more powerful than any angry confrontation because attention is valuable, time is valuable, your presence is valuable. When you understand that, you stop giving these things away to people who treat you carelessly. Remember this, the world rarely rises above the standard you set for yourself. Raise that standard and you quietly change the way everyone else is forced to respond. Once you've established self-respect, the next challenge is protecting it under pressure. This is where most people fail. They know their values, they know their boundaries, but the moment someone insults them, dismisses them, or provokes them, emotion takes control. They react instantly. They raise their voice, defend themselves endlessly, or try to win the argument. In that single moment, they unknowingly surrender the very power they were trying to protect. One of the greatest misconceptions about strength is that it looks explosive. We often associate power with intensity, with the person who speaks the loudest, argues the hardest, or dominates every conversation. But psychology tells us something very different. The person who controls the emotional climate usually controls the interaction. Think about it. If someone can provoke you with a few words, they have discovered something important about you. They now know that your emotions can be directed from the outside. They don't have to overpower you physically. They simply have to push the right psychological button. That is influence. And influence always belongs to the person steering the emotional direction of the moment. This is why emotionally disciplined people appear so intimidating, not because they threaten others, but because they are difficult to manipulate. You cannot easily control someone who refuses to let anger, pride, or insecurity dictate their decisions. Ancient philosophers understood this long before modern psychology gave its scientific language. The Stoics believed that external events are rarely the true source of suffering. What unsettles us is the meaning we assign to those events. An insult has no independent power. It becomes powerful only when we decide that it deserves our emotional energy. Most people never question this process. Someone criticizes them, and they immediately assume they must respond. Someone disrespects them, and they believe silence is weakness. Someone doubts them, and they feel compelled to explain themselves. But why? Why should another person's opinion have the authority to determine your emotional state? That question changes everything. Emotionally mature people understand that not every battle deserves participation. In fact, one of the highest forms of confidence is selective engagement. They don't ignore disrespect because they are afraid. They ignore trivial provocations because they understand the difference between what deserves attention and what merely seeks attention. There is a profound psychological principle at work here. Human behavior is reinforced by reward. If someone provokes you and receives a dramatic emotional reaction, they have been rewarded. Whether they wanted your anger, your frustration, or your desperate explanation, they achieved their objective. You became emotionally available on their terms. Now compare that with calmness. Imagine someone insults you publicly, expecting an emotional explosion. Instead, they encounter steady eye contact, composed body language, and a measured response, or perhaps no response at all. Suddenly, the dynamic shifts. Instead of watching you lose control, everyone watches them fail to gain it. Silence, when chosen deliberately, often says more than a perfectly crafted argument. This doesn't mean suppressing your emotions. Suppression is not mastery. Suppressed emotions remain beneath the surface, waiting for another opportunity to emerge. Emotional mastery means recognizing what you're feeling without allowing that feeling to become your decision maker. There is a significant difference. Anger itself is not the enemy. Fear is not the enemy. Even disappointment serves a purpose. These emotions provide information. They tell you that something important has happened. But information should guide reflection, not immediate reaction. Imagine a captain navigating through a violent storm. The waves are real. The wind is powerful. Ignoring them would be foolish, but allowing the storm to seize control of the wheel would be even more dangerous. Emotions are much the same. They deserve acknowledgement, but they should never become the captain. One of the most revealing moments in any person's character occurs when they face disrespect unexpectedly. Anyone can remain composed when life is comfortable. Real discipline appears when your ego feels threatened. That is the moment your habits reveal themselves. People often believe confidence means never feeling offended. It doesn't. Confident people experience the same emotions as everyone else. The difference is what they choose to do next. They create space between feeling and action. In that small space lies wisdom. In that pause lies freedom. Most conflicts escalate because two emotional reactions collide with one another. One person becomes defensive, the other becomes more aggressive, and soon neither remembers what the disagreement was originally about. The conversation transforms into a contest of wounded pride, but the individual who remains calm changes the entire equation. Calmness has a psychological effect that few people appreciate. It creates uncertainty in the other person. They expected resistance. They prepared for an argument. Instead, they encounter someone who cannot be easily shaken. This forces them to question their own position. Composure is often more unsettling than confrontation. There is another benefit to emotional discipline that is often overlooked. It protects your judgment. Decisions made in anger are usually designed to satisfy the present moment rather than serve your future. Harsh words, impulsive actions, damaged relationships, these are rarely the products of careful thinking. They are emotional debts that must eventually be paid. The disciplined mind asks a different question before responding. Will this action strengthen my position tomorrow or merely satisfy my emotions today? That single question can prevent years of regret. As you practice this discipline, something remarkable begins to happen. People stop seeing you as someone who can be easily provoked. They realize that intimidation, insults, and emotional manipulation no longer produce the desired effect. Over time, many will think twice before attempting to disrespect you, not because they fear your anger, but because they understand they cannot control your mind. And that is a rare kind of strength. Never forget this. The greatest victory is not winning an argument. It is refusing to let someone else become the author of your emotions. Once you learn to respect yourself and master your emotions, there is one final test that determines whether those qualities are real or merely ideas. That test is your willingness to establish boundaries. And more importantly, your willingness to enforce them. Many people misunderstand what a boundary actually is. They imagine it as a wall that keeps people out or as a list of demands that forces others to behave a certain way. But a boundary is neither. A boundary is simply a decision about what you will do when someone crosses a line. Notice the difference. It is not an attempt to control another person. It is a commitment to control your own response. This distinction changes everything. The mistake most people make is believing that words alone create respect. They say things like, "Please don't speak to me that way," or "I don't appreciate that." While those statements have value, they mean very little if nothing changes afterward. Human beings pay far more attention to patterns than to promises. If your words and your actions tell different stories, people will always believe your actions. Psychology has demonstrated this repeatedly. Behavior is shaped by consequences. Every relationship, whether in the workplace, among friends, or within a family, quietly adapts to the standards that are consistently reinforced. If disrespect produces no consequence, it gradually becomes normal. Not because everyone intends to be cruel, but because people naturally repeat behaviors that cost them nothing. This is why boundaries are not declared once. They are demonstrated repeatedly. Imagine someone who constantly interrupts you during conversations. The first time, you overlook it. The second time, you laugh it off. The third time, you become irritated but remain silent. Eventually, resentment begins to grow. Yet from the other person's perspective, nothing seems wrong. Why would they change? Every previous interaction taught them that interrupting you was acceptable. Now imagine a different response. The interruption happens, and with complete calmness, you stop speaking. You wait. Then you say, "I'll continue once I've finished my point." There is no anger, no humiliation, no emotional display, just clarity. If the behavior continues, you shorten the conversation or leave it entirely. That is a boundary. It is quiet but unmistakable. One of the reasons people struggle with boundaries is that they fear rejection. Deep down, many believe that saying no will make them less likable. They worry that enforcing standards will push people away, and sometimes it will, but that reveals something important. Anyone who disappears because you refuse to tolerate disrespect was not respecting you to begin with. They were benefiting from your lack of boundaries. There is an uncomfortable truth that few people like to acknowledge. Every healthy relationship survives boundaries. Only unhealthy relationships are threatened by them. This is because genuine respect cannot exist without freedom. When two people know where the limits are, trust becomes possible. Predictability replaces confusion. Each person understands what is acceptable and what is not. Ironically, clear boundaries do not weaken relationships. They strengthen them. History offers countless examples of leaders who understood this principle. They were not respected because they constantly punished others. They were respected because everyone knew their standards were consistent. Rules did not change depending on mood or convenience. Fairness became possible because expectations remained stable. The same principle applies to your personal life. If your standards change depending on who you're speaking to, people become confused. Worse, they begin testing those standards. Today, you tolerate disrespect from one person. Tomorrow you react strongly to someone else for doing the same thing. This inconsistency weakens your credibility. Consistency creates authority. People may not always agree with your decisions, but they almost always respect someone whose principles remain steady. Another common mistake is confusing boundaries with revenge. These are completely different things. Revenge focuses on making someone suffer. A healthy boundary focuses on protecting your peace. Revenge keeps you emotionally attached to the person who wronged you. A boundary quietly reduces their influence over your life. Notice how much energy each approach requires. Revenge demands planning, anger, and constant attention. Boundaries demand only one decision. This behavior no longer has access to me. One path keeps you trapped in the past, the other moves you forward. There is also tremendous power in refusing to negotiate your core values. Many people negotiate because they hope the other person will finally understand them. They explain themselves repeatedly, believing that one more conversation will change someone's behavior. Sometimes it does, but often it doesn't. At some point, continued explanation becomes an invitation for continued disrespect. Make sure people recognize when communication has reached its limit. After that point, action becomes the language. This doesn't require dramatic exits or public confrontations. Often the strongest statement is simply withdrawing your availability. Less access, less attention, less emotional investments. You stop rewarding behavior that violates your standards. Over time, people begin noticing a pattern. They realize that certain actions consistently produce the same outcome. You remain polite. You remain composed. But your boundaries never disappear simply because someone challenges them. This predictability earns trust. Even those who disagree with you know exactly where they stand. And perhaps the greatest benefit of firm boundaries is internal rather than external. Every time you enforce one, you strengthen your own identity. You prove to yourself that your values are not just words spoken in comfortable moments. They are principles capable of surviving discomfort. Confidence grows because your mind begins to trust you. It learns that when something matters, you will protect it. That is a profound form of self-respect. Eventually, you no longer spend your life hoping people will treat you well. You quietly create an environment where respect is the natural price of admission. Those who value you remain. Those who refuse your standards remove themselves, and that is not a loss. It is clarity. Remember this. A boundary without action is only a suggestion. The moment you consistently enforce your standards, the world begins to believe that you believe in yourself. Once your boundaries are clear, another shift begins to take place. One that is often overlooked because it seems almost too simple. You begin to realize that power is not only expressed through what you say. More often, it is expressed through what you choose not to say. Most people speak too much when they feel uncertain. They explain, justify, defend, and persuade because they fear being misunderstood or rejected. They believe that if they can just find the perfect words, everyone will finally respect them. But there is a hidden psychological cost to this habit. Every unnecessary explanation communicates that you are seeking permission for your own decisions. Think about how often this happens. Someone questions your choices, and instead of calmly standing by them, you launch into a 5-minute explanation. Someone criticizes your boundaries, and you immediately begin defending yourself. Someone misunderstands your intentions, and you feel compelled to correct every detail. What is really happening in these moments? On the surface, it looks like communication. Underneath, it is often a search for approval. Human beings have a deep desire to be understood. There is nothing wrong with that. But there is a difference between offering an explanation and becoming dependent on one. The moment you believe your peace of mind depends on convincing everyone else, you hand over your emotional independence. This is why truly confident people often appear remarkably concise. They are not rude. They are not mysterious for the sake of appearing important. They simply recognize that clarity is more powerful than excess. A short, thoughtful answer carries weight because it suggests certainty. An endless explanation often suggests doubt. Psychologists have long observed that people assign authority to those who appear comfortable with silence. Silence signals emotional control. It tells others that you are not panicking, not scrambling for validation, and not trying to manipulate the conversation. You are allowing your words to stand on their own. That can be surprisingly unsettling. Most people expect resistance when they challenge someone. They expect an argument. They expect defensiveness. When they encounter calm silence instead, they are forced to confront their own assumptions. They begin filling the empty space with their own thoughts, their own doubts, and sometimes even their own corrections. Silence has a unique psychological effect because people naturally dislike uncertainty. When you resist the urge to over-explain, you create space. And in that space, the other person often reveals far more about themselves than you ever could through endless talking. This is one reason skilled negotiators and experienced leaders rarely rush to speak first. They understand that patience gathers information. Every extra sentence spoken unnecessarily is an opportunity to reveal insecurity, desperation, or hidden intentions. The person who listens carefully usually learns more than the person who dominates the conversation. There is another reason to speak with intention. Words lose value when they are used carelessly. Imagine receiving advice from someone who talks constantly. Every opinion is shared immediately. Every silence is filled. Every subject becomes an opportunity for another speech. Eventually, even valuable insights become difficult to distinguish from ordinary conversation. Now imagine someone who speaks only after careful observation. When they finally offer an opinion, people naturally pay attention. Why? Because rarity creates significance. This principle extends beyond speech. It applies to emotional reactions as well. If every criticism receives an immediate response, your reactions become predictable. Predictable people are easier to manipulate because others know exactly which buttons to press. But when your responses are thoughtful rather than impulsive, you become difficult to read. And unpredictability, when guided by discipline rather than chaos, commands respect. This does not mean becoming cold or emotionally distant. It means becoming intentional. Intentional people understand that not every misunderstanding deserves correction. Not every accusation deserves a defense. Not every opinion deserves a debate. One of the most liberating realizations in life is discovering that people are allowed to misunderstand you. At first, this feels uncomfortable because the ego wants control. It wants everyone to see us accurately. It wants universal approval. But such control is impossible. Every person interprets you through the lens of their own experiences, fears, ambitions, and biases. You cannot manage every perception. You can only manage your character. This is where quiet confidence becomes so powerful. Instead of exhausting yourself trying to correct every false impression, you focus on living consistently. Over time, your actions speak with greater authority than any explanation ever could. Consider the individuals who leave the strongest impression on others. They rarely advertise their integrity. They rarely announce their intelligence. They rarely insist on being respected. Instead, they allow repeated actions to build a reputation that words alone could never create. Reputation grows in silence. It is earned through consistency rather than promotion. This is why body language also matters. A calm posture, steady eye contact, measured movements, and an unhurried voice communicate something before a single word is spoken. Human beings are remarkably sensitive to these signals. Long before they evaluate your ideas, they evaluate your emotional state. If your body communicates confidence while your words remain clear and concise, the message becomes difficult to ignore. People begin responding not only to what you say, but to the certainty with which you exist. Eventually, something subtle changes. You stop entering conversations with the goal of proving yourself. Instead, you enter with the goal of understanding, contributing, and remaining true to your principles. You no longer measure success by whether everyone agrees with you. You measure it by whether you remained authentic without sacrificing your dignity. That shift is transformative because the strongest presence in any room is rarely the person speaking the most. It is often the person who has learned that every word should carry purpose and every silence should carry confidence. Remember this. Asterisk, when your actions speak with conviction, your words no longer need to shout. Speak less, mean more, and let your character finish the sentence. By this point, we've explored self-respect, emotional discipline, firm boundaries, and the quiet strength of measured communication. But there is another element that ties all of these together, and without it, the others eventually lose their force. That element is value. Respect that lasts is rarely built on appearances alone. It is built on substance. Many people spend enormous amounts of energy trying to look confident. They study body language, memorize persuasive phrases, and learn techniques designed to project authority. While these tools have their place, they cannot replace genuine competence. Confidence without substance eventually reveals itself. The moment your abilities are tested, appearance gives way to reality. Human beings have an extraordinary ability to detect authenticity over time. You may impress someone once with charisma. You may persuade them briefly with clever words. But lasting respect grows from repeated evidence that you are capable, disciplined, and dependable. In other words, you become someone whose presence improves situations rather than complicates them. This is what it means to build value. Think about the people who naturally command respect in any field. It might be a master craftsman, an experienced physician, a skilled entrepreneur, or a thoughtful leader. They do not spend every conversation demanding recognition. In many cases, they hardly mention their accomplishments at all. Their work speaks before they do. There is a quiet confidence that comes from knowing you have invested years developing yourself. That confidence cannot be borrowed. It cannot be performed. It is earned through repetition, failure, patience, and discipline. The interesting thing is that the more valuable you become, the less desperate you are for validation. Why? Because your identity is no longer built on opinions. It is built on evidence. You know what you can do because you have done it repeatedly. You know what challenges you can overcome because you have already overcome many of them. That creates a form of inner stability that criticism cannot easily shake. Psychologically, this is significant. Insecurity often comes from uncertainty. When people are unsure of their own worth, they become highly sensitive to external judgment. Every compliment feels necessary. Every criticism feels devastating. Their emotional balance depends on how others evaluate them. But competence changes that equation. The more skilled you become, the less emotional energy you waste trying to convince others of your value. You simply continue improving. Ironically, that attitude often earns more respect than constant self-promotion ever could. There is another reason value matters. People instinctively recognize scarcity. What is common is often taken for granted. What is rare is treated carefully. If you become someone who consistently solves problems, keeps promises, remains calm under pressure, and contributes meaningfully to the lives of others, your presence becomes increasingly difficult to replace. Not is the emphasis here, not impossible to replace, difficult to replace. Humility remains essential because no individual is indispensable forever. But there is a meaningful difference between being easily overlooked and being genuinely respected for your contribution. This requires long-term thinking. Our culture often celebrates shortcuts, overnight success, instant influence, rapid recognition. Yet the qualities that create lasting respect rarely develop quickly. Patience is one of the least glamorous virtues precisely because its rewards arrive slowly. Every hour spent learning a valuable skill, every difficult conversation handled with maturity, every promise kept when breaking it would have been easier. Every setback transformed into experience rather than bitterness. These moments seem insignificant when viewed individually. Together they become character. And character is one of the few forms of wealth that cannot be taken away by changing circumstances. History repeatedly demonstrates this principle. Individuals who built lasting influence rarely relied on charm alone. They became students of their craft. They accepted criticism without allowing it to define them. They treated learning as a lifelong responsibility rather than a temporary phase. They understood something many people overlook. The strongest position in any room belongs to the person who has invested more in becoming valuable than in appearing valuable. That distinction matters. Appearing valuable requires performance. Becoming valuable requires transformation. One fades when attention disappears. The other remains even in complete silence. There is also an important ethical dimension to this discussion. Building value is not about becoming superior to other people. It is about becoming superior to the person you were yesterday. Comparison is a dangerous habit because there will always be someone wealthier, stronger, more talented, or more accomplished. If your confidence depends on standing above everyone else, it will never feel secure. Growth offers a different path. Instead of asking, how do I prove I'm better than others? Ask, how can I become more useful, more disciplined, and more capable than I was before? That question leads to continuous improvement instead of endless competition. Interestingly, people are often drawn toward those who focus on mastery rather than status. Why? Because mastery creates reliability. Reliable people reduce uncertainty. They become trusted not because they seek admiration, but because their actions consistently produce results. Trust is one of the highest forms of respect. And trust cannot be demanded, it must be accumulated. Over time, something remarkable begins to happen. The conversations around you change. You no longer need to argue for your credibility because your reputation quietly does it for you. People begin seeking your opinion instead of dismissing it. Opportunities appear because others associate your name with consistency. Even those who disagree with you often acknowledge your competence. That is influence built on substance. It is slower than chasing attention. It requires more patience than chasing popularity. But unlike attention and popularity, it endures. Ultimately. Becoming valuable is not merely about career success or public recognition. It is about creating a life where your skills, integrity, and discipline make you a source of stability for yourself and for those around you. When you become that person, disrespect loses much of its power. Not because everyone suddenly approves of you, but because your sense of worth is rooted in something far deeper than approval. And people instinctively recognize that kind of strength. Remember this. Asterisk, the world may notice confidence, but it never forgets competence. Invest in becoming so valuable that your character speaks long before your reputation arrives. After developing self-respect, mastering your emotions, establishing firm boundaries, speaking with intention, and becoming genuinely valuable, there is one final lesson that completes the picture. It is perhaps the most difficult because it requires letting go instead of holding on. It requires understanding that sometimes the greatest expression of strength is not confronting disrespect. It is refusing to remain where disrespect has become a pattern. Many people spend years trying to change those who have repeatedly shown them who they are. They believe that one more conversation, one more explanation, or one more act of patience will finally transform the relationship. Sometimes people do change. Growth is possible. But there is an important distinction between giving someone an opportunity to improve and sacrificing your dignity while waiting for that improvement to happen. Wisdom lies in recognizing the difference. Human beings are naturally attached to familiarity. Even unhealthy relationships can become comfortable simply because they are predictable. We tolerate behavior that quietly diminishes us because uncertainty feels more frightening than disappointment. We convince ourselves that enduring disrespect is proof of loyalty, maturity, or resilience. In reality, it is often proof of fear. Fear of being alone, fear of disappointing others, fear of starting over, fear of admitting that we invested our time, energy, and emotions in someone who never intended to value them. These fears are deeply human. But if left unexamined, they become invisible chains. One of the most liberating psychological truths is this: your attention is one of the most valuable resources you possess. Where your attention goes, your life follows. Every conversation, every relationship, every conflict, and every emotional investment consumes a portion of your finite energy. When you continue giving that energy to people who repeatedly disrespect your values, you are making a silent decision. You are choosing to spend your most limited resource on someone who has shown little appreciation for it. Think about how often people protect their money more carefully than they protect their peace of mind. They hesitate before spending a few dollars, yet they willingly spend months worrying about the opinion of someone who has never respected them. This imbalance is costly. Emotionally mature people understand that walking away is not always an act of rejection. More often, it is an act of self-preservation. This is not about becoming cold or abandoning people at the first disagreement. Every meaningful relationship requires forgiveness, communication, and patience. Nobody is perfect. Everyone makes mistakes, but patterns matter more than isolated incidents. A mistake followed by accountability deserves grace. A pattern of disrespect followed by excuses deserves distance. That distinction protects both your compassion and your dignity. There is a common misconception that leaving a toxic environment is a sign of weakness. The opposite is often true. Remaining in situations that continually violate your principles usually requires sacrificing parts of yourself little by little. At first, the compromises seem small. You stay silent one more time. You ignore another insult. You excuse another broken promise. Eventually, those compromises accumulate. One day, you realize you no longer recognize the confident person you once were. This transformation rarely happens all at once. It happens gradually through repeated decisions to tolerate what should never have become normal. That is why leaving is sometimes an act of recovery rather than escape. History and philosophy repeatedly remind us that freedom often demands separation. Every individual who sought a more meaningful life eventually had to release something that no longer served their growth. Sometimes it was an outdated belief. Sometimes it was a destructive habit. Sometimes it was a relationship built on manipulation instead of mutual respect. Growth always asks the question, what are you still holding on to that is holding you back? Answering that question honestly requires courage. There is also tremendous psychological power in becoming comfortable with solitude. Many people remain in unhealthy relationships because they believe loneliness is unbearable. But solitude and loneliness are not the same thing. Loneliness is the pain of feeling disconnected. Solitude is the peace of enjoying your own company. When you become comfortable with solitude, something remarkable happens. You stop treating relationships as necessities and begin treating them as choices. You no longer accept poor treatment simply because you fear empty space in your life. That shift changes every relationship you have. People quickly recognize when you no longer negotiate your dignity in exchange for companionship. They understand that access to your time, trust, and presence is earned through mutual respect rather than assumed through familiarity. Ironically, this often improves your relationships rather than reducing them. Healthy people appreciate clear standards. Unhealthy people resent them. Either way, you gain clarity. And clarity is one of life's greatest gifts. It saves you from wasting years hoping someone will become who they have repeatedly shown they are not. This does not mean carrying bitterness into the future. In fact, walking away without hatred is one of the highest forms of emotional maturity. You do not need revenge to prove your strength. You do not need to humiliate someone who has already revealed their character through their own actions. Simply leave, quietly, confidently, without the need for applause or dramatic announcements. There is extraordinary dignity in a silent departure. It communicates that your peace is no longer available for negotiation. As you continue through life, remember that respect is never built through fear in its ordinary sense. It is built through consistency, through emotional discipline, through boundaries that are calmly enforced, through words that carry intention, through competence that cannot be ignored, and finally, through the wisdom to withdraw from places where your character is repeatedly discounted. The people who truly command respect are not those who make others afraid of punishment. They are those whose absence is deeply felt because their presence was grounded in integrity, strength, and self-respect. That is the kind of influence that endures. So if there is one idea I hope remains with you after today, it is this. Never chase respect by trying to control other people. Build a life so rooted in character that anyone who chooses to disrespect you also chooses to lose access to your time, your energy, and your presence. Because the ultimate power is not making people fear you. It is becoming someone who values themselves enough to walk away from anything that does not honor their worth.